It all started when I first met him. The billionaire who thought he could outsmart anyone, especially me. I had heard of him before. The kind of guy who could buy anything he wanted and still be unsatisfied. He didn't just have money, he had power. People listened when he spoke, and his words carried weight in every room he walked into. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the luxury cars or the private jets. It was the way he treated people like they were chess pieces, just tools to get him what he wanted. I remember the first time he reached out to me. I was in the middle of a recording session when my phone buzzed. The name that flashed on the screen made me double-take. I'd never thought he'd even know who I was. But there it was, an invitation. The billionaire, the man who was the talk of the town, wanted to meet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to meet him. The place was one of those exclusive spots in the city, the kind of place where only the wealthiest people gather. As I walked in, I noticed the lavish decor, the suits, the high-end everything. But in the midst of all that, he stood out, tall, sharp, and dressed to the nines. He was everything you'd expect a billionaire to be. Confident, charismatic, unstoppable. He greeted me like we were old friends, like we had known each other for years. We sat down, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what to expect. I've met many people in my life. Some were real, others were fake. But he seemed different. There was a glint in his eye that said he wasn't here just to talk business. It was almost as if he was sizing me up. He leaned in and started speaking. His words were smooth, like he had rehearsed them 1,000 times. And it was clear he was used to getting his way. He began by complimenting me, telling me how much he admired my work. But I could tell he wasn't just buttering me up. No, he was laying the foundation for something bigger. Something that I wasn't sure I wanted to be a part of. He talked about an investment opportunity. Something big. Something that could change the game. His eyes gleamed with excitement as he explained how I could be a part of this project. How my involvement could make me more money than I could ever imagine. At first, it sounded almost too good to be true. But I've been in this industry long enough to know that when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. He handed me the details of the investment. A project that seemed like it could change the world. At least, that's what he made it sound like. But something about it didn't sit right with me. The numbers didn't add up. The timelines were too tight, and the returns seemed inflated. He kept reassuring me that everything was under control, that I could trust him. But I wasn't buying it. I've been around long enough to spot a scam when I see one. But there was something different about this situation. The more I looked at the proposal, the more I realized that it wasn't just the numbers that were off. It was him. There was a subtle arrogance in the way he spoke, the way he tried to convince me that I needed this deal to take my career to the next level. It was like he thought I was just another stepping stone for him to climb higher. At that moment, I decided to dig deeper. I wasn't going to fall for it. I wasn't going to be another pawn in his game. The more I looked into the deal, the more I realized that he wasn't trying to help me at all. He wasn't interested in collaboration. He just wanted control. And what he didn't realize was that I wasn't the type to be controlled. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. What I didn't know at that moment was that this encounter would turn into something bigger than I could have ever imagined. a battle of wits. A game where I wasn't just trying to avoid getting scammed, I was going to turn the tables on him. He thought he was the one in control, but he was about to find out just how wrong he was. What happened next would shock both of us. As I sat across from him, the conversation took a darker turn. He could sense my hesitation. I could see it in his eyes, the way they gleamed with a mixture of confidence and calculated patience. He wasn't used to being questioned, not in a world where people followed his every move, believing everything he said. But there was something about me that made him realize he couldn't just throw numbers at me and expect me to bite. I wasn't like the others who blindly accepted his charm and promises. No, I had seen enough to recognize when something didn't feel right. The moment I voiced my concerns, he leaned in closer. His smile never wavered, but I could tell he wasn't pleased. His tone shifted, becoming more insistent, almost persuasive in a way that made my skin crawl. He told me this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that everyone who was anyone in the business world was already backing this project. "You don't want to miss out on this," he said with an air of finality, as though he believed his words could make me forget all my doubts. But I wasn't that easy. I kept my cool, asking questions, probing deeper, trying to find the cracks in his story. And there were cracks. He couldn't give me a clear timeline. The details were vague, almost too vague, like he was just trying to keep me intrigued without giving me enough to make an informed decision. He mentioned high returns, bigger than anything I'd seen before, but when I asked how, he quickly brushed it off. The investment was in an innovative tech startup, he said, one that was going to revolutionize the industry. Everyone in his circle was already involved. The kind of money that was being thrown around wasn't just about success. It was about power, about changing the game. I kept asking questions, and every time I did, he had an answer. It was the perfect game, the kind where every move seemed planned, every word calculated to pull me deeper into his web. But that was the thing. It felt like a game, and I wasn't sure I was ready to play. Still, the offer was tempting. The kind of money that could secure not just my future, but generations to come. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that this was a rare chance, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't trying to scam me. He handed me a folder with all the documents. As I flipped through the pages, my mind was racing. Everything was perfectly designed, from the fancy charts to the bold projections. On the surface, it looked real, too real. But my gut told me something was off. The projections seemed too perfect, too smooth. Every detail was just right, but there was no substance to back it up. The startup company he was backing wasn't even listed in major financial databases. There was no history to the company, no board members listed, and certainly no trace of anything substantial. I noticed the key players in the company had no verifiable professional backgrounds, just vague profiles that could have been written by anyone. That's when I began to see through the cracks. This wasn't an investment. It wasn't a business opportunity. It was a well-crafted illusion. He was selling me nothing more than a promise. A promise built on lies, designed to take everything I had. The billion-dollar returns he promised? They were nothing but numbers on paper, numbers he knew would never come to life. It was the kind of scam that only someone with his level of influence could pull off. But I didn't let on that I knew. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to see how far he was willing to go to sell me this lie. So, I played along. I asked for more details, acting like I was still interested, still considering his offer. His arrogance only grew as he fed me more facts. The project would disrupt entire industries, he said. It would bring in investors from all over the world, and I, if I was smart, would be one of the first to back it. I asked for a breakdown of the financials. He promised to send me everything by the end of the day. Of course, I didn't receive anything. When I pressed for it again, he claimed that his accountant was tied up, but assured me I'd get it soon. The delay seemed harmless at first, but I knew it was a tactic, a way to push me into a corner where I'd be forced to make a decision before I had all the facts. Days went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. I started digging into the company behind this amazing opportunity. What I found was nothing short of alarming. There were no records of any successful products, no press releases, no partners. It was just a name attached to a string of fake profiles, shady financial backing, and a list of non-existent products. This wasn't a startup. It was a front. And I realized that I was in way deeper than I had anticipated. The deeper I dug, the more I found. The billionaire had set everything up so meticulously. He'd crafted this illusion with such precision that anyone else would have fallen for it. The paperwork was flawless. The websites looked professional, and the projections were glossy and shiny. But when you looked closer, you could see the lies, the cracks in the facade. That's when I realized the true extent of his scam. He wasn't just trying to deceive me. He was trying to destroy me. This wasn't about money. It was about power. He was testing me, pushing me into a corner where I would have to trust him or lose everything. If I fell for this, I would lose everything I had worked for, everything I had built. And for what? A few $1 million that didn't even exist? I wasn't about to let that happen. Not to me, not to anyone. So I made my move. I knew I couldn't just walk away quietly. I needed to expose him, to show the world that behind the glitz and glamour, he was just another fraud, a con artist hiding behind his billions. But I couldn't do it on my own. I needed proof. I needed to catch him in the act. That's when I started to play my own game. The moment I realized I was caught in a scam, everything shifted. The calm facade I had kept up throughout our meetings was starting to crack. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Not just financially, but personally. This man, this billionaire, had underestimated me. He thought I was just another naive individual he could manipulate, someone who would fall for his smooth talk and glittering promises. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. The first step was figuring out how to confront him. I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just accuse him outright. Not yet. He was a master manipulator. And if I approached this the wrong way, it could all backfire. I spent days planning my next move, gathering everything I had learned about the scam, and making sure I had undeniable proof. Every conversation, every email, every document, I kept it all. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Finally, the day came when I knew I had everything in place. I called him, acting like everything was fine, as if I was still considering the offer. He answered almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for me to reach out. I could hear the confidence in his voice, the subtle sense of superiority. It was as if he was certain I'd come back to him, eager to take part in his game. But this time, The tables had turned. I told him I needed to meet again, that I was ready to move forward with the investment. The words were like honey, smooth and calculated, but with an underlying edge. I knew he would take the bait. He agreed, of course. I could practically hear his smile through the phone. He was getting what he wanted, or so he thought. When we met, I could see that he was a little more relaxed than usual. There was a glint in his eyes, a confident gleam, as though he was ready to seal the deal. He had no idea that this time the deal was going to be sealed, but not in the way he imagined. I kept up the act, asking more questions, pretending to be interested in moving forward. But this time, every word I said had a purpose. I carefully started laying out the inconsistencies I had found. I mentioned the lack of history for the company, how I couldn't find any legitimate financial records. I brought up the fact that none of the so-called investors listed in the proposal had even heard of the project. At first, he tried to brush it off. He made excuses, claiming that some documents were private, others had yet to be finalized. But his tone shifted. The cracks were beginning to show. Then I asked the question that would make everything fall apart. I asked for a phone call with one of the so-called investors, someone he had mentioned in passing in one of our earlier meetings. His reaction was immediate. His eyes darted around and his mouth twitched like he wasn't expecting this. "I'll have them call you later," he said quickly. But I could tell it was a lie. I wasn't buying it. "You see," I said, leaning forward, "it's not just about the money. It's about the truth. You've been lying to me. You've been using me. And now, it's time to show the world who you really are." He froze. The smile that had been on his face moments before vanished, replaced by a look of panic. He knew the game was up. I wasn't just some gullible fool. I had pieced everything together, and now he was trapped in his own web of lies. The billionaire was no longer the confident, untouchable figure he had been when we first met. The facade of power, of control, was gone. He sat back in his chair, his demeanor shifting from smug to defensive. He tried to regain control, tried to keep the conversation civil, but it was too late. The proof I had was undeniable, and I wasn't going to back down. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the voice of a man trying to convince himself more than anything else. He wasn't fooling anyone. Not anymore. I continued to press, calmly, methodically, until his composure completely unraveled. Every question I asked hit its mark. Every lie he told was exposed for what it was. He couldn't keep up with the pressure. The cracks in his story widened, and I could see the real fear in his eyes. The fear that he might actually lose everything. The empire he had built on deceit was beginning to crumble right in front of him. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice losing its earlier arrogance. "You don't need to do this. This is bigger than you. I can make sure you're taken care of. I can help you." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the laugh of someone who had seen through the illusion and wasn't impressed by the offer anymore. "Help me?" I asked, shaking my head. "I don't need your help. You're the one who needs help now. You're the one who's in trouble. This scam is over." His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. But there was no way out. I had already made sure that the proof was in the right hands. I had already sent everything. The documents, the emails, the recordings, to the authorities. It was just a matter of time before they would come for him. And when they did, there would be no one left to protect him. He leaned back in his chair, defeated. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask. The billionaire who thought he was invincible, who thought he could outsmart anyone, was now just a man who had been caught. His empire, his reputation, everything he had built was coming crashing down. "I don't know how you found out," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But you've ruined me." I smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory, not exactly, but a smile of satisfaction. He had thought he could play me, that he could trick me into becoming another pawn in his game. But in the end, it was him who had underestimated me. And now, the world was going to know exactly who he was. "You did this to yourself," I said calmly. "You didn't just scam me. You scammed everyone you thought would never figure it out. And now it's over. The truth is out, and there's no going back." He sat in silence for a moment before muttering, "You'll regret this." I just shook my head. "No, I won't. But you will." The game was over, and it was time for the billionaire to face the consequences of his actions. The days following that confrontation felt like a whirlwind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just happened, that I had unwittingly become part of a larger story. The billionaire, who had once appeared so untouchable, was now a man on the verge of losing everything. His empire, built on lies and deception, was crumbling fast. And I had front row seats to the downfall. But there was one thing I had learned throughout this entire ordeal. The fight wasn't over just because I had exposed him. No, the real challenge was what would come next. How would he react now that everything had been laid bare? Would he fight back? Try to salvage what he could from the wreckage? Or would he fade into the shadows, like so many others who had tried to deceive the world? It didn't take long to find out. I had sent all the evidence to the proper authorities. Everything from fraudulent documents to audio recordings of our conversations. I had done my part, and now it was up to the legal system to take over. But I knew that with someone of his power, someone so deeply entrenched in the world of wealth and influence, there was always a chance that things might not go as smoothly as expected. He could try to bury the story, suppress the truth, or use his connections to escape justice. And I wasn't naive enough to think that every scammer gets caught, not when they have the resources to protect themselves. But that didn't mean I wouldn't make sure the truth was out there. Even if the legal system failed, the public would know. Word spreads faster than ever these days, and social media is a powerful tool. As long as people were talking, he couldn't hide. And talk they did. The first article I saw about it was a breaking news story. The headline read, "Billionaire exposed in $50 million scam. A tale of deception and betrayal." That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about my personal encounter with him. This was about everyone he had lied to, everyone he had manipulated, and everyone he had thought he could get away with scamming. The article detailed how the billionaire had been under investigation for months, and how, thanks to the evidence I had uncovered, the authorities were finally able to link him to multiple high-profile fraud schemes. There were names I recognized, victims whose stories were almost identical to mine. He had been using the same tactics, the same lies, the same methods to lure in new targets, all while growing his wealth and power. But the most shocking part came in the following days. More people came forward. Victims from all corners of the world. People who had been too afraid or too embarrassed to speak out before, finally told their stories. Some of them had lost their life savings. Others had been convinced to invest in schemes that never existed. And some had been emotionally manipulated, promised dreams of wealth and success that never materialized. It was as if a dam had broken, and the flood of truth couldn't be contained. But for me, the most personal moment came when I received a call from the authorities. The police wanted to speak to me, to get my side of the story. They had traced the evidence back to him, and now they needed me to testify. My mind raced as I prepared for what was to come. It wasn't just about the scam anymore. It was about justice. It was about making sure that he could never hurt anyone again. I agreed without hesitation, knowing this was the right thing to do. The trial that followed was everything I had imagined and more. The courtroom was filled with reporters, cameras flashing as the billionaire, once so arrogant and confident, was now a shell of his former self. He was no longer the untouchable mogul. He was a man facing the consequences of his actions. I could see the panic in his eyes as he sat there, his lawyers doing their best to defend the indefensible. But nothing could save him now. The evidence was too overwhelming. The victims were too many. And then it was my turn to speak. Standing in front of that courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions. There was anger, yes, but there was also a sense of relief. Relief that I was finally able to share my side of the story, to make sure the truth was known. As I spoke, I watched him carefully. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't even try to defend himself. Instead, he sat there, slouched in his chair, looking defeated. It was almost as if he had resigned himself to the reality that this was the end. The case was open and shut. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before they returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. The billionaire was sentenced to a long prison term, one that would make sure he could never again harm anyone with his lies and scams. But that wasn't the end of the story. After the trial, I received a message from a lawyer representing some of the other victims of the scam. He told me that they had started a class action lawsuit against the billionaire to reclaim some of the money they had lost. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. The people who had been hurt by this man were finally beginning to get justice. And for me, that was the most important part of all. In the end, the billionaire's empire collapsed, and his name became synonymous with fraud and deception. His wealth was frozen, his assets seized, and the companies he had built were dismantled. The once great man was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a warning to those who think they can get away with hurting others for their own gain. As for me, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had come into this situation not knowing what to expect, not sure whether I would even be able to expose the scam. But now, looking back, I could see how far I had come. It had been a battle, but it was one I had fought and won. And more than that, I had helped others in the process. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice, and about making sure that people like him, people who use their power and influence to manipulate and scam others, are held accountable for their actions. The outcome was shocking, yes, but in the end, it was the right one. The billionaire had tried to scam me, but in the end, he had only scammed himself. And that, in the end, was the most satisfying outcome of all.